Hello students, hope you all are doing fine at home. Today we are going to learn something about history. So the name of the lesson is History and Introduction. So let's quickly understand what does the word history means. The word history comes from the Latin word called historia and the Greek word called historikos, which means a true story of past events. It is an account of men from the earliest period to the present day. It is a record of people, places, and events of the past in chronological order. So you need to quickly understand whatever events have taken place in the past time, they contribute to the word history. Okay? Whatever mankind did. So now we need to understand the importance of history. Why is history important to human beings? Why is history important to mankind? Okay, now quickly look upon. The study of history is very important to us because of the following reasons. Now carefully listen to the reasons. First, it helps us to know our past. Through history, we can learn about ancestors, their struggles and their achievements. Second, it helps us to know about great kings, statesmen, and all other heroes of the past as well as ordinary people. Third, it provides us knowledge of the gradual process of evolution of man's civilization and culture. Fourth, it helps us to understand the problems of the past and develop an understanding in us for the solution of present day problems in a better way. So now the point that I've read, let me quickly summarize. History is important to us because we learn from our mistakes. Okay, first thing, we learn about our ancestors. Ancestors means our old age relatives, we can say, and then we can also learn about great kings of time. Alright, and then we can also learn about all other past heroes who were there and also about the common man. History also gives us the knowledge and gives us a better understanding of how civilization of man gradually came into existence and keeps on improving day by day. The history of mankind is very interesting. Gradually and slowly we established ourselves how our ancestors struggled in the past for various things. Okay, we'll see that ahead. The study of history tells us about the origin and evolution of society, which is composed of different communities practicing different religion, languages, customs and traditions. So it's very important. History is very important. It quickly gives us just about how things came into existence, okay, how the society came into place, wherein we have different people who follow different religion, who follow different languages, customs and traditions. Okay, the study of history helps us in building a new record free from all evils of the past. Example, slavery, racism, casteism. So it's very important to understand that how earlier people were dragged into slavery. Slavery, which means they used to make people slave. The kings of their time in history made the common man slaves to get their work done. Racism and casteism was also there. The study of history inculcates us a spirit of tolerance, peaceful coexistence and universal brotherhood. We can learn from the pages of history how extreme nationalism resulted in the World War and proved detrimental to the very existence of mankind. Moving ahead, after the importance of history, we have prehistory and history. We need to understand the term prehistory first. Okay, so the earlier period of human history is also known as the prehistorical period or the Stone Age, for which no written record is available. Please understand what prehistory means. A event where there is no written record. This is also called as the Stone Age, wherein human beings used mostly stones to do their work. And then history, we have seen what is history. So where we have a proven written record, that time period is also called as history. Okay. History, on the other hand, is the recorded account of men's progress. For convenience, the historical period is divided into three broad periods. Very important. Okay. The historical period is divided into three broad periods. Number one, ancient. Second is medieval, and third is modern. Each of these three periods covers several centuries. The length of a period may differ from one part of the world to the another. In India, however, the ancient period began with the first civilization, which is the Harappan civilization, or also called as the Indus Valley civilization, in the 3rd millennium BC and continued up to the 7th century AD. The medieval period began around 8th century AD and continued up to the 18th century AD. It corresponds to the decline of the Mughal power in India. The modern period began then after. The period under study, that is ancient period, stretches from the Harappan times to the range of Harshavardhana in the North India and Chalukyas and the Pallavas in South India. Now we move forward to understand what is time frame. History deals with the story of man's past. To measure the long period of human history, historians have introduced the concept of birth of Christ as the focal point. The letters BC denote the period before the birth of Christ, while AD denotes Anno Domini, after the death of Christ. If the circa is added with any date, it denotes the probable date and not the exact one. Now we need to understand there are two different things. So we need to understand two things in time frame, two different short forms, that is BC and AD. BC stands for before Christ. So historians have made some abbreviations to understand time in the past. So anything before the Christ will be written with the alphabets BC, and Anno Domini comes after Christ. Okay. Now we come back to the fourth point, which is geographical framework of India. It is said that history is the product of two great forces, environment and personality. Therefore, it is necessary to take into account the surrounding in which the actions of the famous figures of history are placed. The environment signifies external factors of conditions. In other words, the physical condition or the physical features of a country, its location, climate, natural vegetation, etc., have always influenced the course of its political, economical, social, and cultural history. Therefore, the history of India cannot be understood carefully without its physical features. India is divided primarily into four distinct geographical regions. Okay. Now India is divided into four different geographical locations. Listen to it. First one is Himalayan region. Second, the Great Northern Plain. Third, the Peninsular Plateau. And fourth, the coastal plains. So these four things comprise of Indian geographical locations. The mighty Himalayas form a formidable wall in the north and have been a strong and powerful defense against invasions from the north until the Chinese aggression in 1962. Unfortunately, there are few opening passes in the northwest which have offered an easy access to invaders of the country. The Persian, Greeks, Kushans, Scythians, Sakas, Turks, Tartars, Mongols, etc. entered India through these mountain passes and established their kingdoms in India. The great northern plains of Indus, Ganga and Brahmaputra have been the principal theatre of Indian history. It was in the valley of Indus that the earliest civilization, that is Harappan, flourished. The Vedic civilization prospered in the Indo-Gangetic Valley, then also known as the Aryavatra. The great religion, that is Hinduism, Jainism and Buddhism, were evolved there. The region witnessed the rise of many kingdoms. The first empire, that is the Mauryan Empire, rose in this region only. The economic prosperity of the region has always allured the invaders. Great literary works were composed here. So many kings who came from out of India came through the mountain passes of the Himalayas, okay, and they established themselves on the great northern plain of the Indus River and the Ganges. The Deccan Plateau, lying south of the Vindhya ranges and the far south, on the other hand, remained unaffected by the political upheavals of the north, as the dense forest and hills made communication difficult and posed a barrier to the invaders from the north. Now, the dense forest means wherein you have lots of trees, lots of greeneries. So the forests are very dark, okay, and the mountain ranges, the Vindhya mountain ranges. So it was very difficult for many of the people to climb the mountains and cross the mountains to come to the Deccan Plateau. Okay. Southern India therefore remained isolated and thereby developed a culture of its own, which is also known as the Dravidian culture. Okay. So you need to understand, Dravidian culture comes mostly from the southern part of India. The fertile coastal plains with an easy access to the sea have facilitated the growth of several kingdoms, maritime trade, flourishing cities and ports. These kingdoms traded and maintained cultural contacts with Java, Sumatra, Burma, Siam and Indochina. It is to be noted that the high ranges of Himalaya and densely forested hills of the central and the southern India have been the abode of several tribes who, been driven away by the invaders, took refuge in those secluded areas. So, there were many invaders who were chasing the tribes. So we can see a lot of tribes, surviving in these forest areas. Okay. For many centuries, these tribes living in isolation have maintained their distinct entity and have preserved their culture. Alright? Now, we would learn about the sources of history. Sources of history, we need to understand from where does this knowledge of the past comes to us. Okay, so there are two different sources. Okay, the first source is called the archaeological source and the other source is called the literary source. Now we would further understand step by step what archaeological source and literary source are. Okay, we will now understand the various sources of archaeological sources. So the first one is archaeology. So what does archaeology mean? It is the study of the remains of the past. Okay. Archaeological remains are those objects and structures which are discovered after digging out at a site. Okay. Now, this is the period wherein man did not know how to read and write. So, whatever he saw, he made pictures of it. He made pictures of animals, he made pictures of trees in the caves, where he used to live in the caves. Okay. Now, there is no written document for that period. Hence, whenever we find anything that is written on the rock or a cave wall or a metal pillar or a clay or a copper tablet, these are called all as the source of the archaeological sources. Okay. We depend on archaeological evidence of the time. As I said, these include engraved written records on the rock, cave walls, when man used to scribble or write or draw anything. And any such things that we find, like ancient buildings, coins, ornament, weapons, tablets, seals, pottery tools, drawing figures, images, and other articles were used by the ancient people. Okay. So, knowledge of the Indus Valley civilization is mostly based on such archaeological remains. So, whatever we find when we dig into the earth on a particular location, we keep on finding such things. So, these things let us know what is all about the archaeological source. The archaeologist, on the basis of such objects, unveils the mystery of the past. So, people who study history keep on finding such things, and then they begin to understand it, and then they begin to explain this to the mankind. Next is monuments. Monuments, this means historical buildings. Like you have the Taj Mahal, then you have the Daulatabad Fort. Okay, these are called historical monuments. Historical buildings, whether in ruins or in the form of standing, tells us a lot about the life of the people in ancient times. The excavation site at Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Hastinapur, etc. gives us a glimpse of the life in the past. The remains of the Nalanda and Vikramshila universities remind of the past glory. The Grand Stupa of Sanchi, the Ashokan pillars, the Rathas at the Mahabalipuram, etc. are also the evidence of a glorious past. Now we have the other point as edicts and inscriptions. So we need to understand what is an edict first. Okay, so the word edict is a royal command written on stones or pillars. It's a royal command. So the royal command was normally given by the kings or the highest order person of that time. Okay. The writings engraved on rock, stones, pillars, metal plates, clay tablets, etc. are called inscriptions. An edict is a royal command engraved on stones, pillars, etc. These objects have remained intact after the lapse of several centuries. Several edicts of Emperor Ashoka give us a lot of information about his achievements and his socio-economic life of the people of his time. Similarly, the Hatingampa inscription of Kharavela of the Kalinga ruler and the Junagadh rock inscription of Rudradaman provide authentic information of those times. Now we go to the next point as coins. Coins, as in we also have coins of our time, 1 rupee, 2 rupee, 5 rupee, 10 rupee coin, correct? So there were coins that were printed in the past also. Okay. you can quickly try and understand how the coins used to be in the past. So the first picture, you can see different types of coins wherein you can see a face of a man, okay, and different things. So coins. Numismatic, the study of coins, also throws a great deal of light on the ancient times. Coins made from different metals provide us information on the development of science and technology. The language engraved on them reveals the exact period to which the coin belonged. The pictures engraved on them throws light on the art, cultures, society, religion, economy, and administration of the period. The coins also bear the names of the ruler who issued them. The coins of Kushana and the Gupta rulers preserved in the museums throw a great deal of light on the religion and the administration of those rulers. So, the rulers of the past normally had their faces printed on the coins to give them a better understanding. So, it is important then we come to know what kind of metal was used, whether it was gold coin or a silver coin or a bronze coin used at that point in time. Of course, gold coins were the costliest coins, and then they used to have something written on it. Something written as in some kind of information or the name of the king or the time of that king, okay, when that coin was made. Now we come to the next point, that is artifacts. Now what are artifacts? Artifacts or works of art includes sculptures and paintings. Sculptures, these are stone carvings, okay. These help us in reconstructing the cultural life of the ancient period. The specimen found at Taxila that belonged to the period of Kanishka throw light on the Gandhara art and the religious beliefs of the Kushana king. The images and paintings of the Gupta period still preserved in the Ellora caves reveal the exquisiteness of the contemporary sculpture, beside yielding information about the religious beliefs of the people. So whatever caves that we see in Ellora, okay, beautifully carved, beautifully painted and well maintained, these belong to the Gupta period, which are still preserved, and they give us lot of information to understand. So if you go to Ellora caves, you will find beautiful carvings, okay. The painting and frescoes at Ajanta, Ellora and other places relieve the contemporary society, economy and art of that period. Now we would study the second source of history, which is literary sources. Literary sources are further divided into religious literature and secular literature. Okay. Now we'll understand what are these. Okay. The Indians displayed a strange indifference and aversion to writing history, although they richly contributed to all conceivable branches of literature. Rudiments of history are preserved in our religious literature. Reference to historical events and traditional are also scattered in other works. Thousands of years ago, when there was no paper to write on, our ancestors wrote on the dried barks of trees. They were also known as bhojapatras, plates of copper, etc. Earlier, the art of printing too was unknown. Our ancestors therefore wrote their accounts by hand. Such handwritten accounts are called manuscripts. The word manuscript comes from the Latin word manu. Manu means handwritten scripts, okay. Now there was no paper to be used. There was no paper. Man did not discover or invent what paper was. So whatever he could find where he could write, he could find the barks of trees where he used to write on it. Okay. Literary sources include first religious literature, as I told you, and second is secular literature. We'll understand what is religious literature. The religious or sacred literature of India includes the Brahmanical literature, Vedas, Smritis, Upanishads, Puranas, Aranyakas, etc., Buddhist and Jain sacred texts and epics. The Rig Veda is the oldest work among the Brahmanical literature. It indicates the religious, social and economic life of the Aryans. It depicts the social and economic life of the Aryans, the Rig Vedas. The later Veda and Samhitas provide enough information of the life of the post-Vedic Aryans. The Smritis, composed mainly during the Gupta period, elucidate the social and religious life of the people of that age. Among the epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata are the most important, written by Maharishi Valmiki and Maharishi Vedvyas respectively. Both epics have great religious importance for the Hindus. Among Buddhist literature, the Tripitakas are the oldest. They contain the religious views of the Buddha, rules of Buddha Sangha, and the Buddhist philosophy. The Jatakas are the stories of the lives of the Buddha in earlier births. The Mahavamsa and the Deepa Vamsa of Sri Lanka are also throw a great light on the ancient history of India. The Milan Panho presents a philosophical dialogue between Menander, the Greek king, and Nagasena, the Buddhist monk. The early Buddhist literature provides us a lot of information on the social and cultural life of ancient India. The Angas of Jains are also very important to the society as they give a lot of knowledge about the political and economical conditions of those days. We move to the next point, which is secular literature. References to historical events and traditions are also scattered in the works of other than religious. Even the grammatical works of Panin's Ashtadhyayi and Patanjali's Mahasabhaya contain valuable historical information of that period. Mudrakas of Vishakadatta, Katha Sarita Sagar by Somadev, and Brihat Kathamanjari by Shimendra elucidate some events of the Mauryan period. However, Kautilya's Arthashastra is a treatise on political science and statecraft during the Mauryan period. Nitisara by Kamandaka elucidates the political system of the Guptas. So many great writers of that time have written secular literature showing how a king used to rule his country. Okay? Patanjali's Mahasabhaya and Kalidasa's Malavikramitra narrate the story of the Sunga dynasty. Sudraka's Mirchakatikala and Dandin's Dasa Kumar Charitra unveil the contemporary society. Among biographies, Harsha Charitra by Banabhatta is the best, narrating the achievements of King Harshavardhana. Vikramakadeva Charitra by Bilhana describes the achievements of King Vikramaditya, the later Chalukya king. Harshavardhana himself was a great scholar who wrote 3 plays, Nagananda, Ratnavali and Priyadarshika, which throw a good deal of light on the conditions of India during his rule, which is the 7th century AD. Kalhana's Raja Tarangini traces the history of Kashmir from the earliest times to the 12th century AD. It may be called the only historical work till the 12th century. Sangam literature in Tamil is a valuable source of information about the life and culture of Tamil people during the reign of the Chola and the Pandya rulers. Some court poets chose their royal patrons as heroes of their poem. Nandik Kalambakam narrates the achievements of Pallava king Nandivarman III, and Kalingaputrani describes the invasion of Chola king Kulottunga on Kalinga. Otakunta has described the achievements of 3 Chola rulers. Moving to the next topic, which is foreign accounts. A great deal of our knowledge of ancient Indian history comes from foreign travelers' account. Herodotus, the Greek historian, mentioned about India in his history. But the most valuable contribution were made by foreigners who came to India. Megasthenes, the Greek ambassador who lived in the court of Chandragupta Maurya, wrote Indica, an account of India. Geography of India by Ptolemy about 130 AD, and Periplus of the Arthurian Sea by an unknown Greek author who visited in the second half of the 1st century AD are important works on India. Now, there were many scholars in history who came to India, who were traveling, and they have also written great knowledge, great wisdom when they visited India. Okay? So, when we read their historical work, we come to know that how great was India at that point in time also. At a later period, Chinese travelers came to India in large numbers to collect religious books and visit the holy places of Buddhism. Some of them, like Fa Hien, came in 5th century AD, Yusung 7th century AD, and I Sing 7th century AD have recorded valuable accounts of contemporary India. So we had Chinese travelers also, like Fa Hien and all, coming to India for visiting the religious and holy places of Buddhism. Muslim scholar Al-Biruni visited India along with Muhammad Ghaznavi, gave a very interesting account of the literature, religion and social institutions of India in his famous book called Tarikh-e-Hind. The Venetian traveler Marco Polo passed through some parts of southern India on his way from China to Persia between 1292 and 1294 AD, and has left a very interesting account of the social manners and customs of South India.